Good morning, Colorado. You are listening to the Daily Sun Up. It's a conversation with the Colorado Sun. I'm team editor David Krause. Before we jump into today's conversation, here is a quick message from our sponsor.
Support comes from Credit Union of Colorado, proud to call Colorado home for more than 90 years. They are a local institution with a track record of showing up for the community and putting people first. Credit Union of Colorado. Honestly good. Learn more at honestlygood.org. Set the summer trend. Electrify your lawn equipment and help reduce harmful ground-level ozone in your Front Range community. Learn more at simplestepsbetterair.org. Got leftover paint taking up space? Recycle it with Paint Care. Paint Care makes it simple and easy for households and businesses to recycle their leftover paint responsibly. Drop it off for free at one of more than 200 sites across Colorado. To learn more, visit paintcare.org.
Now, back to the show.
Good morning, Colorado, and happy Tuesday. Tamara Chuang and I are taking some time off this week, so today we're bringing back our conversation from late last year when we talk about a $21 million project across Colorado to digitize public records dating back to the 1800s. The project is being funded by a $2 fee from every property filing starting in 2016.
Since 2016, a $2 fee from every property filing has helped fund the state's $21 million project to preserve paper and analog records for digital eternity. Sun business and tech reporter Tamara Chuang wrote about this project recently and how things are going in this massive undertaking, and she is joining me now to talk about the scope of this pretty impressive project. Hey there, Tamara, how are you?
I'm good, David. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. All right, Tamara, so let's just start off with how this program started, right? And what kinds of records we're talking about here.
Yeah, so this was an effort that, this particular one that I wrote about is from a 2016 law that the state legislature passed, and it created something called the Electronic Recording Technology Board, which essentially is an entity that is funded with this $2 fee that you mentioned. And that money goes toward preserving our digital records. So it's not all digital records, but it's mostly land records, real estate records, the plats. A lot of this stuff is important. Who owns the stuff, where are the property lines, stuff like that. And, that's why this effort has been partly funded by the state. But for some counties, they've been able to do it on their own. But, this is, I would say it's probably not a big financial priority for a lot of local governments. They got to spend their money elsewhere. So they weren't doing it. And this was one way to get Colorado counties up to speed.
And you're talking about, mentioned real estate records and land deals. What about like marriage records or liens and deeds, that kind of stuff too? And what are we talking about more? Is this project just about digitalization or is there more to it?
Yeah. So, it's all those records. The idea is, all this stuff, our marriage licenses, real estate transactions, stuff like that. It's all documented. Many of us pay a fee to get it done. Some of it is not digitally archived, and I'm talking about anything before 2000, for example. Colorado actually became the first state in 2002 to pass a e-recording sort of law, and that also collected a fee starting back in 2002, so that every time you go into, you buy a new house or something like that, your record is now digitally recorded as opposed to written or typed out or written by hand, which was, that's how things had to be done, more than 100 years ago. And so the thing is, what was important really was kind of these land records. And I think this is partly because of, how America got started, back in the Revolutionary War. our forefathers really fought for, their rights to govern themselves. And part of it was owning land. Back then, land in the 13 colonies was owned by the British monarchy. So it wasn't like you had any claim to it. Maybe you were granted it if you were some lord or, something like that. But, this was a way for America to be on its own and to give its residents actual rights to property. So that's why it's been really important to document these records and who owns the land and where the land is. Oh, one thing about that is like, one of the records in Arapahoe County was from 1867, and it was signed by President Andrew Johnson. This was back in granting land to veterans, who had fought in past wars, well, the War of 1812 in particular. And I spotted one that was specifically to someone named Simon Kilmore, a musician, and this happened decades after Simon served, but it was just part of an award to those veterans for fighting in our wars.
Tamara, these kind of process and procedure stories can be a little difficult to write sometimes, but once you get in and you find some of the history, it really kind of makes it a lot more engaging. You mentioned that example, but what are some of the other examples maybe of some of the obscure files that you heard about or people are finding out about?
Sure. And, I should mention that, this all came about because Arapahoe County was sort of celebrating the its full digitization of a lot of these land records. This happened in earlier this month in October, and so I stopped by, and so they actually had pulled out some of these records that they found, and their very first marriage license or marriage certificate was dated 1903 or 1904. I can tell you more about the weird date there. But it was to a man named George Benedict, and it was a marriage to Miss Ella L. Rockwell of Denver. So, these marriage certificates, they were on the record, of course, and so people today can now go back and study their genealogies and see who's related to who and all that. One thing about this 1903 record is Arapahoe County was actually the state's first county, and it incorporated in 1861, which was about 15 years before Colorado actually became a state. But because it was the first county, my question was, what happened to the 40 years before? Because, this was the first record was 1903, and Arapahoe County has a book, and it says Book 1. So this was their first book of a documented marriage license. And, the folks over at the Arapahoe County's clerk and recorder's office were saying, well, the thing about Arapahoe County is it really represented all of what is today the Denver metro. Denver kind of split off after Arapahoe. And of course, at that time, we were a territory of Kansas. And, I learned all this stuff because I'm not from Colorado and I didn't study about state history when I was growing up. But anyway, so that's what happened with why some of these records might actually be in Denver as opposed to here in Arapahoe County. And the other funny thing is, George Benedict, I figured, why not figure out who he is? And honestly, I couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but Littleton had a mayor by the name of George Benedict, same initials and everything, same middle name. And he was mayor around that time up until 1897. So unfortunately, there's a lot of this history available for public viewing and public record, but you got to do more research than just a simple, pulling up an old file. And when I tried to do that, the county clerk's office, of course, they didn't really know who George was. I actually also reached out to the Littleton History Museum to find out if they happen to know, but their only records were from his days as mayor. And, he actually was married to. They only had records of his. He was married 3 times, and their only record was of his third wife, who was named Margaret, and they had one daughter. And she died. I mean, Margaret died in 1900, and then George died in 1904. So that would conceivably be 1 year after he might have gotten married a 4th time. So we don't really know, or I don't really know for sure. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting research that can be done. The fellow at the History Museum didn't think it was the same guy, but the names are the same, and he's from Littleton. So who knows? If there's a reader listening out there and happens to know the history of George Benedict, and if he happened to be married 4 times instead of 3, that's the type of stuff you can find in these records.
Tamara, you mentioned it earlier. In 2002, Colorado became one of the first states to require counties to record documents electronically. Counties were allowed at that time to add a $1 technology surcharge, but really converting records from before 2002 was up to the counties to find funding. So what's been the reaction to some of those clerks and people who you talked with, especially those in the smaller rural counties?
Yeah, so the electronic recording technology board, that I mentioned that got started up with this $2 fee and stuff, they actually have to prioritize rural counties. Because if you think about it, if you have, I don't know, a town of 5,000 people, you're not going to get that many folks coming in to file a new real estate record. And so the amount of revenues coming in is very unequal to a place like Arapahoe County or the city of Denver. So that's why a lot of these rural counties have actually digitized their records already. Which is why Arapahoe County is one of the last, even though it was the first county in the state, it is one of the last counties that is digitizing its archive. I spoke to the clerk over at Kit Carson County. They have actually received $400,000 in grants from the ERTB, and they completed their digitization back in 2021. So, a lot of these counties, the smaller counties are on their way. It's the larger counties that are still trying to find funding. I did reach out to Denver, which is a city and a county. I don't know how common that is in other states, but that was something new to me when I first moved here. But the city of Denver actually was funding its own effort starting back in 2013 to try to get a lot of its older real estate records and marriage records digitized into their archive. And they, back in 2019, they had digitized 11 million land documents and marriage certificates. But there was still more to do. And when I talked to the folks over there, they mentioned that they've had this $1.1 million project to do more records, which could be another 10 million records to be completed. But they've only received one ERTB grant, and that was for $200,000 back in 2019. So if they want to do this, they need more funding from the city. And if you are a Denver resident right now, that's kind of a challenge. It's been a challenging year for the city, and they've had to do some cuts, because their expenses were higher than their revenues. So I'm not sure when that is going to be completed, but from speaking to the ERTB executive director, she's telling me that their hope is that by 2026, pretty much all of Colorado will be covered, at least with these grants, and have money to digitize the rest of their archives.
Tamara, get into that a little bit more. Is there a timeline or a deadline for when all this has to be done? And can anybody look up county land record history at this point, or how is that playing out?
Yeah, I don't think there's really a timeline. I mean, the only timeline that I can tell about this is that, remember, we talked about this 2016 law that started this $2 fee for anyone who is trying to record a land document or real estate transaction and stuff in the county in various counties statewide. So that actually ended a few years ago and had to be extended. And it was this fee was extended again last year. So it's now it will now expire in 2029. Of course, it could get extended again, but that might be a date where you say there's a timeline to this or a deadline for the digitization. And I should tell folks that $2 fee, while it does go toward digitization and preserving our history, the funds aren't always used just for that. I mean, like a few years ago, the threat of your records being hijacked, a cyber attack or something like that was an issue. So they allowed counties to apply for cybersecurity funding to secure their data. Some of this is used for annual maintenance. Some of it's used to buy new plot scanner or a new computer or new software. So it has been helpful. I mean, over the years, so since 2016, but I think they only started collecting the money in 2017. This board has collected about $23 million in revenues, and about $21 million was spent on in grants for all the counties statewide. Only about about 6 or so counties have not received any money, but some of those are the large counties. So they've had to find their money on their own, and it's just because larger counties aren't prioritized, they maybe just haven't had as much luck getting some of the funds.
Tamara, always great to get your insight on what goes on in a story and behind the story as well. If you haven't already, you can check out Tamara's story and other business news from around Colorado on our homepage and on our free Colorado Sun app. And if you haven't already as well, you can always go to coloradosun.com/working to sign up for Tamara's free weekly What's Working newsletter. Comes out every Saturday morning as well. Always get some information in that as well. Tamara, thanks again for such a fun story.
Thanks. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. And finally, here are a few stories that you should know about today.
A helicopter is rounding up wild horses in northwestern Colorado this week in the federal government's latest effort to thin the Mustang herds that roam the state. The goal of the Bureau of Land Management's roundup near Meeker is to remove more than 900 Mustangs and relocate them to holding facilities or fresh pastures. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation processed a record 60,000 background checks for gun purchases last month ahead of a new law that took effect Saturday. The law prohibits people from buying certain semi-automatic weapons without additional vetting and completing a safety course. The agency processed 20,000 background checks during the same period last year. An Aurora police officer who fatally shot a 37-year-old black man during a traffic stop last year is facing second-degree murder and manslaughter charges. A grand jury indicted Matthew Mealy, who is white, after determining he broke the law when he opened fire on Brajon Belt Stubblefield on August 30th. The panel began reviewing evidence earlier this year.
To read these stories and much more, visit our website, coloradosun.com. As an award-winning nonprofit news outlet, we take our mission of credible, independent journalism seriously, and you can check out our trust indicators at coloradosun.com/ethics. Our music is by the Denver-based Matt Skellinger Group. A link to their music is in our show notes, and a special thanks to Swallow Hill Music. I'm David Krause. See you next time.